Welcome to Unbiased Science, where we bring scientific method to the madness. I'm your host and public health scientist, Dr. Jess Steyer. And today I am joined by somewhat of a celebrity in the science world, Dr. Joe Schwarcz. I am going to read Dr. Schwartz's bio in just one moment, but I was joking right before we hit record that there's nothing I can say that will do justice to his career as a scientist and the work that he's done in the science communication space. But let me give it a shot, okay? All right. So Dr. Joe Schwarcz is a legend in the science and science communication world. He holds a PhD in chemistry and is the founding director of McGill University's Office for Science and Society, which has the mission of separating sense from nonsense. Sounds familiar? He is well known for his informative and entertaining public lectures on topics ranging from the chemistry of food to the connection between the body and the mind. Dr. Schwarcz has received numerous awards for teaching chemistry and for interpreting science for the public, and was actually the first non-American ever to win the American Chemical Society's prestigious Grady Stack Award for demystifying chemistry, and a host of other awards, which we'll be sure to link in our show notes. He currently hosts the Dr. Joe Show, which I want to hear more about. He has also appeared hundreds of times on the Discovery Channel, CTV, CBC, TV Ontario, and Global Television. He also writes a newspaper column entitled The Right Chemistry and has authored 18 books and has a new book out called, and tell me if I got this correct, Superfoods, Silkworm, and Spandex. Joe, is it okay if I call you Joe? Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Jess. And it's certainly a pleasure to speak with someone who's really a kindred spirit.
And Joe,
we're both dedicated to demystifying science and really separating fact from myth.
Well said. So can you tell us a little bit about this new book?
Yeah, and I know that the title sounds kind of strange, and it is meant to sound a little bit strange because, of course, what you want to do is tickle people's minds of what this is all about. And the reason that I selected those three terms is because it kind of gives the impression, hopefully, that science is everywhere. That no matter where you look, whether you're looking at superfoods, whether you're looking at what silkworms do or how spandex behaves, you're looking at fundamental science. And the book, like most of my others, is a collage of articles, essays, really, that are, in the 1,000 to 1,200 word length, that aim to demystify science in an informative and entertaining way, and generally focus on aspects of everyday science, on nutrition, on drugs, medication, cleaning agents, etc. And hopefully they will spark curiosity. They will invite people to look into these issues in somewhat greater depth. And I try to write these in such a way that they are understandable by everyone. I don't trivialize the science, but I do make sure that I explain every novel aspect of the science. So, you don't have to be a professional scientist to understand, because in a sense, we're all scientists from morning to night. We practice science from deciding, what we're going to have for breakfast to why we don't sleep properly. Right. Mm-hmm. So I deal with all those kinds of issues and try to create curiosity about science, and hopefully also fulfill some of that curiosity and provide some answers to many of the questions that people have. And the books are put together in such a way that you don't really need to read them from beginning to end. You can, my hope is that you can pick it up, open it at any page, read that particular item, say, isn't that interesting? And then the next time you go to the bathroom, you take the book with you and open it up at a different page and, learn something new again.
Joe, I just love you hold a PhD in chemistry, which could be very intimidating for a lot of people. But I've really fallen in love with the way that you explain things in such an accessible way. And really your storytelling is a gift. And we're certainly going to link to the articles that you publish. They could be found, and tell me if I'm mistaken, on the McGill Office for Science and Society. You put out these articles, right? Is it on a weekly basis?
Well, we have over the last 25 or so years accumulated thousands of articles that I have written and that my colleagues have written on virtually every topic that you can think of.
Right.
And yeah, we do have a search there so that people can look for topics. But our main vehicle, really, as far as the public is concerned, is a newsletter that we publish every week. It's free, of course, and anyone can sign up for it. Just go to our website, and there's a direct link. And not only do we have articles in this newsletter, but videos as well, because I try to produce about 2 short videos every week. And these, I hope, encapsulate some aspects of current science, but also some unusual things, that people would never have thought of as being science. So again, a question of putting together something that's informative and entertaining, but it can all come your way with one click on our website, and you get the newsletter Saturday morning at, I think it comes at 6 a.m. And you have your weekend entertainment.
Love it. And we'll of course link to that. So what got you into science communication? I'm just curious, was there a particular topic or misconception, misinformation that really, that made you think, wow, I really need to do something about this?
Well, the story actually goes back much, much longer than that, because I got interested at a very young age in science. In fact, it was in grade 6. And it's, interesting that I can kind of trace my interest to one specific event. And that event was a birthday party to which I was invited by a friend. And his parents had hired a magician to entertain us, as is, common at birthday parties. The guy wasn't very good. He was a teenager, and most of the tricks he did eminently forgettable. But there was one that turned out to be absolutely memorable, because he took what looked like 3 pieces of rope, and he magically linked them into one long piece. And he said that he had done this with an invisible magic chemical that he sprinkled on the ropes. Well, even at that young age, I knew that there was no such thing as the invisible magic chemical. I didn't know how the trick, of course, was done. But what intrigued me is why he had used this word. Why magic chemical? Why not alakazam, abracadabra, hocus pocus, etc.? So I got interested in that, and I went to the school library, and I took out a book on chemistry and a book on magic. And I've been interested in both of those ever since. And I suspect most of your audience, it would kind of seem that this is really unrelated, magic and chemistry. What a bizarre juxtaposition. But the truth is that they're very closely related, because, of course, everything in magic has a scientific explanation. It's just that the audience isn't privy to that. You know that when a lady is being suspended in air and seems to be floating in air, you know that she has to be held up there by some sort of process. It's just that you don't see this. Chemistry can also look magical. You pour 2 solutions together, you get a color change. And if you don't know anything about indicators and acids and bases, it looks absolutely magical. But of course, in science, we try to take out the magic and explain what is going on, whereas the magician always wants to try to hide the effect. So there is this juxtaposition, and that is what got me interested. And I started reading about both chemistry and magic, and learned that there were so many fascinating things in chemistry. I was reading about medications and the history of paints, etc. And I hoped that when I got into high school, I would actually learn more formally about these things. that I had been reading, in these library books, and that didn't happen. I must say that the chemistry I had in high school was kind of deadly. We just learned to memorize formulas and draw laboratory equipment, never going into the laboratory.
Right.
And then I hoped that once I had gotten to university, I would really get into the heart of this. And I had wonderful courses and wonderful profs in university. But very rarely was there any connection made to practical life, which is what I had become interested in. That's what I was reading on the side. And I remember a phys-chem course. And, phys-chem doesn't really bring back great memories for most
No.
people, right?
No, it does not.
Right. And I was pretty good at it, solving the Nernst equation and, plugging into formulas, etc. But it was all sort of rote work, until near the end of the course. The prof somehow mentioned that what we were really talking about was a battery. And he started to explain how battery works. Now, if that had been mentioned at the beginning, the whole thing would have been different, because I would have realized why we were doing this. What's the point? And I think it was at that moment that idea was germinated, that if I ever got into academia, which luckily I was able to do, I would make sure that whatever I was teaching, that the students would be aware of why they were doing this. Where was the light at the end of the tunnel? Now, it is true that sometimes that tunnel is pretty long. When you're teaching quantum mechanics, for example, it's a damn long tunnel with a bit of light at the end. But if you can tell the students what that light is all about and why we're doing this, then it all becomes very palatable. And that's what I started doing when I first started to teach organic chemistry. I used applications from everyday life as examples all the time. And that created interest in the students, I guess, to the extent that they talked about these things at home around dinner time. So I started to get questions from parents who had study groups. And I was invited to speak to these study groups. And really, that's how it started, and got into the whole public lecture thing. And then in the 1980s, with a couple of colleagues, we were invited to put on a scientific demonstration here in Montreal. In 1967, we had a wonderful World's Fair here called Expo 67. And the city tried to keep the spirit of this going with a scaled down version annually every summer. And there was a pavilion there that was run by UNESCO, the scientific arm of the United Nations, and they wanted some sort of scientific display, a mini science museum. And I was invited with a couple of colleagues to do this. So we put together displays of, explosions and color changes, what people like to see. And we put through a couple 100,000 people over 2 summers at these exhibits, because we had shows that went on roughly every hour or hour and a half. And I even have a picture of a young Justin Trudeau, who now is our prime minister, who was at one of those shows with his father, who was Pierre Trudeau, who was the prime minister at that time. So anyway, that was interesting thing. And one of the demonstrations that we were doing was polyurethane. And this is interesting. You take 2 liquids and you pour them together, and it forms like a mushroom that hardens. It's a very interesting demonstration. But this was at a time when people were worried about insulation, urea formaldehyde. And we had just come through the 70s, on the energy crisis, people were insulating. And there were some issues there, because when urea formaldehyde is improperly used, it releases formaldehyde, which is a toxic gas. You don't want that in your house. That's not what we were demonstrating. We were demonstrating polyurethane, which is also a foam. And I remember one morning, a Monday morning, classic event, picking up my newspaper, the Montreal Gazette, and it had on page 3 a headline about chemistry. So of course I start reading this, and it was all about our efforts at the UNESCO Pavilion. And the reporter was saying that, well, everyone is worried about urea formaldehyde. Here are these chemistry profs saying what a wonderful material it is. So by about 9 o'clock that morning, I had a letter on his desk, together with a large egg that I had made out of polyurethane with a rope around it that he was to hang around his neck for penance for having laid this scientific egg. And I explained to him that foams can be made of very different materials. And I gave him an analogy. I said, look, you can have a glass of clear liquid, and you don't know if it's water or vodka. Being a reporter, he recognized this analogy. And I said, look, you can have two foams which look the same, behave the same way, but are chemically very different. So I said, look, we were demonstrating something that does not release formaldehyde. This is not the same thing at all. And then he did something very unusual for a reporter. The next day, he wrote a very nice mea culpa article, retraction. And he said the real problem here wasn't urea formaldehyde or polyurethane. The real problem was he had skipped too many classes in chemistry in high school. And I thought that the story was dead at that point, but it turned out it wasn't, because the next day I got a call from a radio station asking if I would like to come on the air to comment on this controversy. So I said, of course, I'd be happy to do this, but there's no controversy here, and I did. And I told the story very much like I told it to you, and I guess they liked the way I said it. And then the next week, there was something else that came up. They called me to comment, and then pretty soon they asked if I would like to do this on a regular basis. And that's how the Dr. Joe Show started, and it's now been going on for 43 years, the longest running show on chemistry in the history of the world. Of course,
oh my God, Joe!
It may also be the only radio show on chemistry in the history of the world. Yeah, so it's been going on, and it's on every Sunday afternoon now at 3 o'clock Eastern time. And of course, with the advent of internet, it's also live on the internet, so anyone can listen from anywhere in the world. So that's how things started. And then about 25 years ago, the university said, with all of this happening, let's kind of formalize this. And basically unleashed the Office for Science and Society on the world, and gave us the mandate of separating sense from nonsense, which is really what we try to do. So there's, in a nutshell, is sort of the career up to this point.
I am hanging on every word. This is unbelievable. And I'm just wishing that you were my chemistry professor. I think things could have been very different. But
you seem to have done okay.
But what you said really resonates with me. This obviously theory and theoretical way of thinking is important. It's sort of foundational for those of us who've trained in science, but I was always drawn to the more practical applications of science, and for me that manifested as public health. But to your point, people are very interested in particular about things like foods and nutrition. It impacts us on a daily basis. And Joe, you mentioned, and it's relevant to your new book that's out, this term superfood. Can you explain what is a superfood? What are some superfoods? Let's just talk about this a little bit.
Well, superfood is a marketing term. It's not a scientific term, because the idea is that there are specific foods that give you more than just simple nutrition, that somehow impart health, make you live longer. It's a very seductive idea. And historically, of course, it goes back to Hippocrates, who supposedly said, "Let thy food be thy medicine." Although the fact is that I have looked for documentation that demonstrates that he actually said that, and I can't find any. So that may be a myth, but he very well may have said that, because it certainly was obvious to people historically that we are made of the food that we eat, because food is the only raw material that ever goes into our body. So obviously, it has to have some relationship to health. So he may have said that, but of course, Hippocrates also thought that lettuce cooled the body and resulted in cooling of passions. And he thought that pigeon droppings were a treatment for baldness, but mercifully, you didn't have to eat them. You would rub them on your head. Although, if you've ever seen pictures of Hippocrates, you'll see that it didn't work very well. So the idea of food being healthy, has a very long history, and of course the ancient Romans, the ancient Greeks used various kinds of herbs, to try to impart health. Garlic was a classic even among the Egyptians, who would supposedly feed it to their slaves to give them more energy. But much more recently, of course, with everything that we know about nutrition, uh, all kinds of nutritionists and gurus, self-appointed gurus, have jumped on the bandwagon to try to come up with, something that has specific health properties. And these range from things like, apple cider vinegar to traditional vitamins and minerals. But there's no such thing as a superfood. Yes, I mean, we know that a plant-based diet is really what is to be preferred. I mean, I don't think it has to be exclusively plant-based, but mostly plant-based. And that you can make an argument for, having a breakfast of oatmeal with blueberries and other berries, certainly being better than Danish. But that doesn't make blueberries into a superfood. Yes, it does contain some substances, polyphenols, which in the laboratory you can show have some antioxidant effects, and you can make these kind of arguments. But I think the arguments should be made on behalf of the overall diet, not on any individual food. There's no individual food that is going to make you live longer, but there are certainly diets that are healthier than others. And obviously, this is something that we need to talk about a lot, because the obesity epidemic is evident to anyone who lives in North America. And, we know all the consequences of obesity. It's linked to heart disease, linked to cancer, linked to diabetes. And we need to do something about it. But, what to do is pretty complex, and does not come down to a single superfood. The only thing that can legitimately be called a superfood is whatever Superman eats, because that is a superfood.
Love it. So is there anything that you go out of your way to eat on a regular basis, aside from, I know you said plant-based diet?
I try to eat berries for breakfast every morning, because it's it's better than the alternative to donuts and that, and plus I like them, I enjoy eating them. And I think that there is argument to be made for ground up flax seeds and chia seeds, and certainly fermented dairy products like yogurt. So, my idea of a really great breakfast is to blueberries, strawberries, or whatever, with some yogurt, and I put chia seeds and ground up flax seeds on top of it. The flax seeds need to be ground, otherwise they come out the same way that they went in.
I love it.
Chia seeds and flax seeds give you omega-3 fats, and argue that these are beneficial. So I try to eat that. And I must say that over the years, since I've become more and more interested in diet, because professionally I have to be more interested in it, I've somewhat changed my diet. I certainly still enjoy a good hamburger. I'll have the occasional steak, but I eat a lot more vegetables. I try to have a salad with every meal. I'm a big proponent of sourdough bread, because of course, it's fermented, which gives you a lot of goodies, and also it tastes very good. And I try to couple it with exercise. I mean, unfortunately, that's not something that can be bottled, but the evidence is just overwhelming, about the benefits of exercise. And it does not have to be extreme. You don't have to be running marathons. You can take a 30-minute walk every day, a brisk walk, and
Hmm.
it will do you a lot of good. It's very difficult to get people motivated to do that,
Right,
they look for simple solutions to complex problems, and of course that's what the quacks deliver, is simple
right.
solutions to complex problems, and that's why I fight them so vigorously.
Right, the magic pills, the magic
Yeah,
solutions. But you said something that I think is really important. I mean, I too will eat yogurt with berries because I really enjoy yogurt with berries. But every now and then, I will enjoy a Danish or a stack of pancakes and some bacon. Right? I think it's this all or none thinking. This is something I say
yeah. I
quite
mean
frequently. That's
yeah. Life
yeah,
life is all about living, and enjoyment is a part of life as well. And it's the old story: if you got to cut out everything that you like to make you live longer, what's the point? To what are you living
right.
longer for? So yes, certainly moderation in everything, including in moderation.
I love that.
There are some things that yeah, once in a while you can certainly do. But I mean, if I'm going to have a pastry, which I sometimes do, uh, I want to make sure that at least it tastes good. So I will certainly go for a nice French croissant or French
Ooh.
pastry, not for some crappy donut.
All right. I love that. All right. So shifting gears slightly, I want to talk about vitamin C. Well, just supplements and vitamins in general, but you wrote this fantastic article on vitamin C. You talked about the origins of this belief that vitamin C can cure the common cold. You traced it back to Linus Pauling. So let's talk about it a little bit. And the other thing I'd love for you to touch on is this concept of eminence versus evidence, which I thought was really just a very interesting concept. So can you share some of the evidence
Sure,
or lack thereof?
sure. I mean, the eminence evidence story and vitamin C are very closely linked through Linus Pauling. Now, Linus Pauling, for some of our listeners who may not know, is arguably the greatest chemist of the last century. His book on the covalent bond used around the world still today to teach chemistry. He is the only person in history to have two unshared Nobel Prizes. The first one is in chemistry. The second one was for peace because he was a big anti-war advocate. But later in his life, he got interested in vitamin C. Now, Linus Pauling had published hundreds of peer-reviewed articles. I mean, he was scientist to the core, obviously knowledgeable about the importance of peer-reviewed literature and all of that. And yet, he wrote this little manuscript based on his own personal evidence and that of his wife, suggesting that large doses of vitamin C were a treatment or even a cure for the common cold. That kind of got me interested, because he was my childhood hero. That's who Linus Pauling was. Really saying something that I didn't see had all that much scientific evidence, but this was sort of a scientific god, treading on earth who had said this. And because he had such renommee, uh, all kinds of researchers launched studies into vitamin C, including studies with Marine recruits who are very good to do these kind of studies with, because you have a Marine recruit and you tell them to jump, the only thing he asks is how high. So
Right.
if you tell them to take 2 grams of vitamin C a day, they will do that. You can rely on it. So these studies were done, and unfortunately, they came out negative. The vitamin C did not cure the common cold. Now, this, of course, started my interest in vitamin C and looked into the history. And that goes back to the 1500s when Jacques Cartier, the French explorer, first came to Canada and set up a colony in Stadacona, which today is Quebec City. And his sailors were ravaged by scurvy, which, of course, was terrible in those days. And it was, today we understand why, because on these long ship voyages, I mean, it took months to cross the Atlantic. Their food was salted meat and dried crackers. And of course, no fruits, no vegetables, and nothing that had vitamin C. Scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency disease. And Cartier's men suffered from scurvy. And he had some meetings with the natives, with the Indians. And in those days, it was still okay to call them Indians. Today, of course, that has kind of become a socially unacceptable word, used indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, he had some meetings with Iroquois, who told him to give his men a brew, a tea essentially made from the leaves of a tree. We're not sure what it was. Maybe pine trees, because pine cones and pine needles do have some vitamin C. And many of his men recovered from scurvy. And this was long before the classic experiment by James Lind that came hundreds of years later. Because Cartier never really published in the peer-reviewed literature, which didn't exist at that time. So James Lind sort of independently discovered a couple hundred years later that giving citrus fruits to sailors would prevent scurvy. Today, of course, we know exactly why this is. It's because, of the vitamin C content. So that's what, got me interested. And then with, all of the advent of vitamins and superfoods, etc., people started pushing vitamin C for everything as a cure-all. And of course, during COVID, of course, we learned about this, how they vitamin C and improve your immunity, etc. Well, vitamin C, like other vitamins, does play a role in immunity, but it is not the ultimate, factor in the immune system.
Right.
So, that's where the story kind of stands. Well, almost. There's a little bit of corollary here in that because of Pauling's suggestion of taking large doses of vitamin C at the start of a cold, I said, hell, let me give that a try, knowing that vitamin C is remarkably safe. I mean, the only thing it does is makes your urine a bit more expensive, because you excrete a lot of it. But I tell you, and this is absolutely anecdotal evidence, I find that when I feel a cold coming on, a scratchiness in the throat, and I take a gram of vitamin C an hour for 3 or 4 hours, I fend off the I,
See?
I'm hesitant at even saying this because this is nothing but pure anecdote. On the other hand, let's also understand that virtually all science starts with anecdote.
Yes.
Starts with an aha moment. When someone says, gee, isn't that interesting?
Right.
And then someone else picks it up and does something with it.
I actually really appreciate that honesty. I'm someone who I've been vocally, outspoken about supplements and how the large majority of them are, as you said, you're paying for expensive urine. They're unnecessary. Our body's excreting most of it, right? They're not regulated. There can be potential interactions. There are, I'm not saying for vitamin C, but, some of the herbal supplements that people take. But I'm someone who sometimes early in my cold, I'll take a zinc supplement. I've seen some evidence. I don't know if you have any thoughts on zinc in particular.
There are actually some evidence of zinc being an important player in the immune game. And there actually are some studies published on zinc and the prevention of the cold. So
right.
Yeah.
But I think what we were saying, it's they're not these these supplements, certainly not a panacea, right? Like people often make them out to be, oh, this is, it's a cure.
Supplements is that for whomever they might be useful are not the people who are taking them.
Absolutely.
It's the poor people who don't have the money to eat lots of fruits and vegetables. They are ones who might benefit from supplements. But who is taking all of these supplements is, the middle class and the upper classes, who want to live forever and think that this is the way to go.
Now, Joe, you recently, I think it was within the last couple of weeks, you published an article titled Sordid Medicine Shows Exploited Indigenous Cures American Settlers Capitalized. Oh, excuse me, I'm connecting sentences. American settlers capitalized on indigenous people's long history of using plants to treat ailments. Can you explain what you're talking about? I think you gave the example of the was it the willow bark, and I've talked
Right.
about that, how it's the, what is it, the salicin or the right, that we've
Well, of course, they use of plant extracts and various herbs to treat illness goes back to prehistoric times. Because let's face it, what else would people do? Especially after Hippocrates, and this is something we have to give him credit for. He introduced the idea that illness was not retribution from the gods for something that humans had done, but it was something internal in the body, and it could be externally treated. And the idea of using food or herbs, was sort of rational. Now, this, of course, was so with Ayurvedic medicine in India, and for indigenous medicine in North America as well. Natives certainly used all kinds of things, from tea made from the bark of the willow tree to golden seal to marigold, of the various kind of herbs. And in the late 1800s, the era that we kind of refer to as the patent medicine era, where anything could be sold, and they would say, patent has been granted for this, which is nonsense. That none of these were really patented, and so there were a lot of these native medicines that captured the imagination of Europeans who had emigrated to North America. And medicine shows traveled across the country in those the late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, these medicine shows were very interesting. The idea was to sell medicine to people, but they were sort of a collage of entertainment and lecture. So there would be jugglers and magicians, including Houdini, who got his start in one of these magic shows, medicine shows. And they would attract the crowd. And once the crowd was attracted, the pitchman, the doctor or professor, would come out, who was neither a doctor nor a professor, but he would start talking about the brilliance of the natives, who were thought to be clever children of nature, who had discovered things that the dumb white man did not know. So they would sell these various kind of products, and the classic one was called sagwa. And this was even promoted by Buffalo Bill, who had been hired to, to do this. And he had a classic statement that no Indian would ever be without their blanket, their bow and arrow, or their sagwa. Of course, all natives were without their sagwa because it was invented by these basically charlatans, sometimes it would have alcohol in it that would make people happy. So these medicine shows kind of capitalized on the native culture and basically hijacked some of these herbs and made them into panaceas, which was nonsense. And unfortunately, that nonsense still goes on today. For example, as you know, there are many herbal remedies that are sold in terms of preventing or curing cancer, which are nonsense. But there's one here that's quite popular. It's called Essiac, which was invented by a nurse about 80 years ago, by the name of Renee Kais, and basically she just twisted her name around, and it became Essiac. And it's made of a number of herbs, and the legend is that she had this advice from natives. It's not even true. I mean, there was no native connection. But this is marketed as a treatment for cancer, and this is something that probably bugs me more than anything else, because cancer, of course, is a catastrophic disease, and while of course we have made a lot of headway. I mean, some cancers now are curable, but Obviously, many are not, and that gives rise to all of the quackery in this area, because where science cannot fill a void, the quacks will rush in to fill it. So this thing, SCAC, is still out there, and the quacks are, of course, promoting it. They're capitalizing on people's desperation, and desperate people will do desperate things. And this is totally understandable. I mean, I've seen this, colleagues, the most scientifically educated, when something terrible happens to them, they will contemplate going over to the dark side. And
Right.
often it is because they know that conventional treatments don't work. So they say,
Right.
maybe there is something to that homeopathy.
Right.
Desperation will do that. Well, no, there is
Right.
nothing to homeopathy. It is the most absurd of all of the so-called alternative practices out there. But it can be, a straw that people grab onto. And that's why I never attack the victims. I never attack the ones who no matter what kind of nonsense they latch onto. It is the people who knowingly spread false information, the disinformants. Those are
Mhm.
the ones who are worthy of attack.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think of my own father who, at the very end of his life, he was battling he had COPD and he had bladder cancer and he was desperate because the treatments were not working. And I remember we had a loved one who, I mean, it's tricky because I think this person actually genuinely believed in Reiki, talking about sending energies through the phone, and I just, of course, you and I know that that's, of course, there's no scientific basis for that. But I just remember seeing my dad's face. It's like, maybe, like at that point, you're desperate for
Yeah.
anything. So how can you blame the person?
Well,
I really do.
the whole
Yeah.
concept of alternative medicine is bothersome. What is it an alternative to? And there's a classic line that we use all the time. I'm sure you've used it too. What do you call alternative medicine that works? Medicine.
Medicine.
But
Exactly.
the scientific community is not adverse to incorporating novel ideas as long as they work. So
Right.
certainly there are concepts out there that start out as quote alternative, but if they prove their mettle, they get incorporated, right? And,
Right.
and of course, we have the classic example of Barry Marshall and Helicobacter pylori. When this Australian gastroenterologist first suggested that ulcers were caused by bacterium, what did we say? We said, what nonsense. We know what causes ulcers. It's stress. It's eating the wrong foods. And just take your Maalox or whatever antacid. And then, of course, in a foolhardy way, he proved by swallowing some bacteria and causing
Right.
gastroenteritis. He proved this point, cured it with antibiotics. And now, of course, we know that 80% of ulcers are caused by bacteria and can be cured with antibiotics. But this is now conventional medicine. And it didn't
Right.
take long in order to be embedded. And,
Hmm.
once the idea was hatched, it was an anecdote for sure, but then research was done, proper randomized double-blind trials, and presto, we have evidence.
Yeah. Joe, I mean, you're just making me think that I hear a lot of skeptics say, well, no, we're suppressing these treatments, because we want to keep people sick, because there's a business for treating sick people. So what would you say to those people who, they automatically mistrust the
Yeah.
FDA, these.
As if the alternative world wasn't a business, right?
Right,
They're,
right,
they're just selling you all of these things out of the goodness of their heart, and they have no
right,
interest in making money. Look,
right,
I'm certainly not one to say that big pharma is made up of choir boys, right? Uh, Big pharma is a business. It is a business, and they want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money. Who of us doesn't want to do that, right? I mean, that's how the world functions. And yes, sometimes there are unethical things, but the best way to make money is to sell useful, safe products, things that work, that make people get better. And that's what big pharma can deliver. Sure, there are skeletons aplenty in that closet, although not nearly as many as in the closets of the alternative movement. That there you have a virtual graveyard. Okay, but yeah, there of course there are issues, but no scientist wants to undermine the public health. I mean, we all want to give as much as possible and make people healthy and legitimately live longer, etc. So this whole notion that there's some sort of collusion between scientists who are unethical and big food and big pharma and big cosmetics this is just absolute nonsense.
Mhm.
If you have worked with some people in FDA or in Health Canada, and which I've done a lot, and I've spoken to congressional committees as well. You see that these are people who want to do good. I mean, obviously, there are rotten apples in that world as well.
In every field, right?
In every field. I mean, we have imbeciles like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, what can you say about people like that? And we have their equivalent in science also, but we have to look at the whole picture. And what we really want to foster is proper research, all peer-reviewed, properly published, and guide ourselves by that. And we don't have all of the answers. And
Mhm.
that's one way that you can distinguish between the quacks and the scientists. Is our language is so often has to be peppered with maybe and buts and ifs and I don't knows, whereas they never use those terms. They know everything. They
Mhm.
have the answer. They have the guarantees.
That's right.
And so that's how you distinguish between us and the quacks, like my ducks here, which is that's the reason that I collect them. I have hundreds of them, and it started off just as ducks quack, so symbol of quackery, and then it became what some people would say an obsession. And but I like to be surrounded by them because it's a constant reminder of the need to fight quackery.
I love that. I just have one more question for you and then we'll wrap up. I know we're at time. I get a million questions about benzene. Benzene has been in the news here. I guess there was, well, here, let me just take a step back. I did read that there are parts of Ontario that declared a state of emergency over ongoing and excessive discharge of benzene, but this was from an industrial facility. But then I've also seen there have been some articles last year, the FDA alerted drug manufacturers about the risk of benzene contamination in some hand sanitizers and aerosol drug products. There was also an article, let me see here, about what do you call it? Sunscreen, there being some contaminants. So, how scared should we be about benzene? Maybe we could differentiate between industrial versus non industrial exposures.
This
Are
gets
it,
into a very complex world of toxicology, right?
Okay.
Where the cornerstone was laid about 500 years ago by the great sage Paracelsus, who coined the expression, only the dose makes the poison, right? And all drugs are poisons, and all poisons can be used as drugs. I mean, it's always a question of amounts. Science revolves around numbers. Numbers are the currency of science. There's no question that benzene can be toxic, but it depends on the dose. Now, unfortunately, there are some substances that can be toxic at a pretty low dose, and benzene is indeed one of those. We know that benzene can cause all kinds of issues, including leukemia. And we learned this from occupational exposure because benzene is a commodity chemical. It is used in many, many industrial processes. For example, when polystyrene, which is the stuff that we use in food packaging all the time, well, that's made from benzene. Ingredients in sunscreen are made from benzene. Nylon is made from benzene. Now, benzene is found in petroleum and it's extracted from petroleum. This is what petroleum refineries do. They separate components of petroleum into useful materials. And benzene is an extremely useful material. As I said, there's so many items. But you do not want it in your bloodstream. So industry has to very carefully monitor worker exposure to benzene. But when you take a look at some of these unbelievably complex chemical plants, you look at pictures of these plants with kilometers of piping all over the place, you think, how can this possibly function? Who can design this? So how do they build such things? So of course, there's always a chance of leakage. It happens. And when benzene leaks, that is a very dangerous situation because it gets into the air. And that was the story here with this leak in Ontario, which supposedly they found what it was, and that that should be the end of that. But we're exposed to benzene all over the place. Benzene is commonly found in car exhaust, especially in diesel exhaust. So we're inhaling it all the time. Now, yes, there are remnants of benzene in some personal care products because of how they are manufactured. Sometimes it is just from the propellant. For example, in spray cans. Well, we no longer use freons as the propellant in spray cans, so now we use butane. But that butane can have trace amounts of benzene because butane also comes from petroleum. So yes, while it is true that there are trace amounts in sunscreen or in deodorants, or the latest one is benzoyl peroxide, which is an acne treatment. Yeah, it's possible, but we are surrounded by thousands and thousands of chemicals. Chemical abstracts now list about 160 chemicals, 160 million chemicals, 160 million known chemicals. Now, of course, we're not exposed to those all the time, but we're exposed to thousands on a daily basis. And of course, we could talk about the chemicals that leach out from plastics. We could talk for a week about that, all of the concerns. So we are exposed to thousands of chemicals in the air, in our water, in our food, every single day. It's impossible to tease out the effect of any single one.
Right.
We don't have every answer. Science cannot provide answers to everything. There are many things that it can, and that's what we focus on. So, the worry about benzene is not totally nonsensical. It's legitimate, but you have to take into account when it's worth worrying and when it's not. Numbers matter. What is the exposure?
Oh my God. Joe, I feel like we could speak for, I don't know, days and not run out of topics. So if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back on sometime. Really, this was such an honor. You're absolutely incredible. You're making the world a better place. You're educating all of us. Thank you so much. Can you let listeners know where they can listen to your Dr. Joe show and follow along?
The best avenue for all of this is to go to a website, which is mcgill.ca/OSS. The OSS stands for Office for Science and Society, not Office of Special Services, which was an organization during the Second World War in the U.S. So,
Oh, goodness.
it's a different kind of OSS. And you can get everything there. Now, as far as the radio goes, it's every Sunday at 3 o'clock. And it's on our local radio station, which is CJAD, but it goes all over the internet. But you can just go to cjad.com and you can listen directly, or you can go to our website and get all my previous radio shows are there, so you can listen to them as podcasts.
Please trust me, you do not want to miss out on those. Joe, you are wonderful. Thank you again for joining. Thank all of you for listening. Again, you know already, please follow along at Unbiased SciPod across social media channels. Be sure to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter, theunbiasedscipod.substack.com. Also, check out my other podcast, Bites of Health. They're daily 5-minute episodes with pediatricians where we answer commonly asked pediatric questions for parents. Science communication is obviously our shared passion. And thank you again, Joe, for
Thanks
joining.
very much. I'll just leave you one last thing. Is
Yeah.
I'm not a great sleeper, unfortunately, and I've tried all the things, and I normally wake up between 4 and 5, and I have trouble going back to sleep. So what I always do is I reach for my phone and I listen to your podcast.
Oh, stop it. Oh my God. Well, I can't.
I listen to, and I mean there are some very good podcasts out there, but I'll listen to yours, and when I get through yours, I listen to some of the political ones, which ensure that I don't go back to sleep these days. So
Yeah, that's one way to ensure nightmares. No.
absolutely.
Well,
Well,
thank
anyway,
you.
thanks very
Yeah.
much for this. It was
Yes.
a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness. I'll be pinching myself for weeks to come. And thanks everyone for tuning in for No Nonsense, Just Science.